Hostin's obsession with race gets thrown back in her face. Today's video comes to us from sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out she's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe.
No, it's interesting because I think Sunny is very intelligent, but she's ideologically captured.
Right.
You know, that's sort of, I think the other ones, there's a couple of the other ones, don't have to name any names, who are just very dull-minded. But I think Sunny's not one of them. I think she's smart but captured.
Sure, I think
the audience expected a fiery debate, but nobody predicted just how far it would go when Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld confronted Sunny Hostin right there on live television. From the moment the segment started, Sunny tried to control the conversation with her usual polished tone, but the air felt heavy with anticipation. Everyone watching knew Rogan and Gutfeld weren't going to play nice. They were ready for battle. Joe Rogan leaned forward in his chair, eyes sharp, posture steady, like a fighter preparing for the first round. He didn't waste time with small talk. He went straight to the heart of the issue that Sunny thought she could avoid. "Let's be honest," Rogan said with force. "People don't trust mainstream media anymore because of voices like yours." The crowd gasped, and even Sunny's co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sunny fired back, raising her voice, insisting that her show represented fairness and truth. But Rogan's expression didn't change.
Yet people think things are funny because they don't think about the person they're making fun of. You and I are both guilty of doing that.
Of course.
As comics.
Absolutely.
But that one was like particularly
you're like, wow.
Rough.
Well, it was started to view, and then they have all these ones. They like to talk.
People have to wonder, where does Sunny Hostin get her opinions? Like you said, and it's obviously from her husband. She has to tell her what to say on The View, because without it, she's got nothing up there. She's not very bright. But the problem with her is that she went full racist. She injected skin color into a fairly generic behavior.
His steady silence made her words feel more desperate than powerful. Then Greg Gutfeld jumped in, his trademark smirk cutting across the table like a knife. "Fairness? Please," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What you call fairness is really just package bias, sold with applause signs in the background." The audience roared with laughter. Sunny tried to regain control, snapping at Gutfeld to let her finish. But every time she spoke, her arguments fell flatter, while Rogan and Gutfeld hit harder with facts and raw bluntness that rattled her. The cameras caught Sunny's face tightening, her jaw clenching, her frustration boiling as the pressure grew. She was used to softball exchanges, but this was no safe space. This was a showdown. Rogan doubled down, reminding viewers of moments when Sunny's commentary dismissed ordinary Americans as misinformed or ignorant. "People are tired of being talked down to," he said, his tone unshakable. "That's why shows like mine keep growing, because we listen instead of lecture." The crowd applauded, clapping louder and louder as Sunny tried to interrupt. But her words were drowned out, and her attempt at authority slipped further through her hands with every second. Greg Gutfeld wasn't finished either. He leaned back casually, letting the tension simmer before striking again. "Sunny, you can try to spin this, but the truth is clear. Your version of reality only works inside this studio." His words hit like a hammer, and even the crew behind the cameras couldn't hide their reactions. Sunny looked shaken, her voice trembling slightly as she tried to call Rogan and Gutfeld conspiracy peddlers.
Worried about losing your job, and you're worried about podcasts taking over, and who's the source of news, and we said Donald Trump was Hitler, but half the country disagreed with us and he won, and this is and Joe Rogan believes in dragons.
Sausage maker Johnsonville is recalling more than 42,000 pounds of pork sausage for possible contamination with plastic fibers. Fortunately, authorities were able to track all 42,000 pounds to a single location in New York City.
Sunny swung with her usual sanctimony, and they sent it back,
But that only opened the door wider for Rogan, who shot back instantly. That's the problem. You dismiss everything you don't like as a conspiracy instead of facing the facts. The audience cheered again, sensing the imbalance of power on the stage. Sunny raised her hand, pleading to finish her thought, but it was too late. The momentum was gone. The energy had shifted entirely to Rogan and Gutfeld. Greg leaned in with a cutting laugh, his words dripping with sharp irony. If truth makes you this nervous, maybe that says more about your side than ours. The audience exploded with applause, some even standing from their seats. Sunny's face turned red as she tried to defend her position, repeating talking points that now sounded hollow and weak compared to the relentless force coming at her. Every sentence she spoke seemed to crumble under the weight of Rogan's logic and Gutfeld's sarcasm. At one point, Rogan looked directly into the camera and said, with cold precision, "Millions of people see through this now. It's why the old system is collapsing in front of you." The words sent shockwaves through the studio, leaving Sunny nearly speechless. Greg piled on, mocking the way Sunny clung to her cue cards and rehearsed lines. "You don't need cue cards when you've got common sense," he quipped, sending the crowd into another burst of laughter and applause. The clash wasn't just verbal, it was emotional. You could feel the studio audience swaying away from Sunny and toward Rogan and Gutfeld, their energy feeding the takedown in real time. By the time the first segment wrapped, Sunny Hostin looked drained, cornered, and visibly rattled.
More time to talk. And I thought Will Smith wouldn't let a black man finish. If her IQ was half as high as her smugness, she'd be Einstein.
While Rogan and Gutfeld looked sharper, stronger, and completely in command of the narrative. It was more than a debate. It was a public unraveling on live television. And the night was only just getting started, because the second half of the showdown would prove even more devastating. As the show returned from commercial break, the tension was so thick you could almost feel it through the screen. Sunny tried to compose herself, but her eyes darted nervously, clearly bracing for another round. She knew she couldn't win. Joe Rogan wasted no time jumping back in. "Sunny," he said firmly, "you talk about truth, but when inconvenient facts show up, your first instinct is to bury them." The camera panned across the crowd, and you could see the smirks, the nods, the people shaking their heads at Sunny's weak defense. This wasn't the smooth image she was used to projecting. This was her unraveling live for millions to see. Rogan leaned forward, his voice calm but forceful. "People don't tune in for theatrics. They tune in because they're desperate for honesty. And every time you dodge, every time you spin, they see it." The audience clapped louder, sending shockwaves across the studio. Sunny's co-hosts sat frozen, knowing they couldn't jump in without risking being dragged into the storm themselves. The silence from her side of the table was deafening. Greg leaned back, grinning like a cat playing with its prey. "It's not that you're bad at debating," he said, with mock sympathy. "It's that the truth doesn't need a safety net, and you can't handle that." The words landed like a knockout punch, and Sunny visibly winced. Gutfeld smirked and added insult to injury. "Numbers don't lie, Sunny, but apparently they do terrify." His sarcasm struck again, leaving the audience howling with laughter. Sunny's frustration boiled over as she snapped that Rogan and Gutfeld only thrived by provoking outrage. But Rogan hit back instantly, his tone deadly serious. No, we thrive because we say what others are too afraid to admit. The truth of his words hung heavy in the air, silencing even Sunny's loudest defenders. The studio erupted again, clapping and cheering as Sunny tried to interject, but was cut down by the noise of the audience itself. The show had slipped completely out of her control. Greg twisted the knife further, grinning at Sunny as he said, "If honesty is outrageous, then maybe the problem isn't us, it's you."
And frankly, that show, you want to talk about a show that set women back, is The View. You want to talk about that show. If the CIA is engineering, Antifa and fucking the Capitol riot, some crazy misogynist engineered The View, because there's nothing worse than The View. In terms of there are so many brilliant women out there. None of them are on The View. None of them have gone near the set of The View. I mean, they have brought in the lowest tier of the, what is it, the Y chromosome?
No, double
the
X.
Okay.
Double X.
That line sent the crowd over the edge, clapping and stomping their feet in approval. At that point, the moderators had lost complete control of the broadcast. The stage belonged entirely to Rogan and Gutfeld, and the audience knew they were watching history unfold, a complete dismantling of Sunny Hostin on live TV. By the end of the second segment, Sunny looked visibly exhausted, her hands fidgeting nervously with her notes, her face flushed as the reality of what was happening sank in. She wasn't just losing an argument, she was losing her composure in front of millions. And the worst part, the most brutal takedown was still to come in the final round, where Rogan and Gutfeld would deliver the finishing blow that left Sunny speechless and humiliated. The third and final segment began with a silence that felt almost cinematic. The cameras panned across the audience, and everyone leaned forward, waiting to see if Sunny Hostin could recover, or if Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld would finish what they started. Sunny took a deep breath and tried to reset the tone, telling the viewers at home that the conversation had become toxic. But even the way she said it sounded like a plea, rather than authority. She was fighting not just her opponents, but the weight of the moment itself. Rogan immediately jumped in, his voice clear and unshakable. Toxic? No, this is accountability. And accountability feels uncomfortable when the truth isn't on your side. The audience exploded in applause, drowning out Sunny's attempt to cut him off. Gutfeld leaned forward with a smirk and fired off another sharp jab.
Did you watch the whole thing or just the parts that I sent you?
I watched it. Obviously, just the parts that you said. Did I watch a whole episode of The View?
No woman can do that unless you're stupid. But
I have a job.
Here's the thing. How can they call themselves progressives when they keep saying that nothing has progressed? Then it's on them.
Critics say that you make everything about race.
Yeah.
And what's your response to people when they say that?
My response to people is that unfortunately, because of the origins of this country and the original sin of this country, everything is about race.
Yeah.
And that's just true, right? But if we were a country that could come to grips with our history, accept our history, perhaps pay reparations that are due, and perhaps just stop trying to erase our history.
And while all of this was unfolding, what did Sunny do? She did.
Toxic is what happens when honesty collides with denial, and tonight, denial is sitting in your chair. The crowd howled with laughter, the sound shaking the studio walls. Sunny tried to rally, insisting that she represented the voice of reason. But Rogan didn't let it slide for a second. Reason, he repeated with disbelief. Reason doesn't censor. Reason doesn't mock everyday Americans for asking questions. That's not reason. That's arrogance disguised as authority. Her face tightened, Her hands clutched her notes, and the camera zoomed in on her, visibly shaking. This wasn't just debate anymore, it was exposure. Gutfeld added salt to the wound, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sonny, you don't represent reason, you represent rehearsal. Every word you've said tonight sounds like it was scripted by a producer 5 minutes before the show." The audience roared with laughter, clapping so hard the moderators struggled to calm them down. Sunny's voice cracked as she raised it higher, trying desperately to cut through the noise. But the more she shouted, the weaker she sounded compared to Rogan's calm authority and Gutfeld's sharp precision. Joe Rogan delivered another crushing blow, his words slow and deliberate, so that nobody missed a single syllable. The truth doesn't need applause signs, it doesn't need cue cards, and it doesn't need media spin. It just needs courage, and that's exactly what's missing here. The audience erupted, many rising to their feet in thunderous agreement. By this point, Sunny's co-hosts sat frozen.
I saw you on The View. They get so much hate watching and hate watching viral clips of them saying ridiculous things. I mean, it is a rabies infested hen house.
Joy Behar calls her a 10. I mean, how dare she objectify a woman with a sexist rating system, but it's such a typical thing from a 1.5.
Well said.
Watching helplessly as their colleague unraveled on national television. The power dynamic had flipped so completely that it felt like the show wasn't even hers anymore. It belonged entirely to her challengers. Greg grinned and leaned back, casually twisting the knife. "You've had your platform for years, Sonny, and tonight we just showed America why fewer and fewer people are buying what you're selling." The crowd roared again, their energy feeding the collapse happening before their eyes. Sonny, her voice quivering, tried one last desperate counterattack. She accused Rogan and Gutfeld of profiting off division. But Rogan was ready for it. His tone cut like steel. Division isn't created by asking questions. It's created when voices like yours silence anyone who dares to think differently. The audience went wild, clapping, cheering, even chanting Rogan's name. Sunny's attempt at a counter-argument vanished beneath the sound of the very people she thought she could sway. Greg stood up slightly from his chair, raising his voice with a final, devastating line. "This is the end of the performance, Sonny. The mask has slipped, and everyone at home just saw the difference between stagecraft and truth." The studio erupted in chaos, with the audience practically shaking the floor with applause.
Milk this till the end of time. You're right. Anytime she says something stupid, I'm going to go, "Slave owner!" Kat, I just watched that. That's the second time I've watched that. She was tipped off beforehand, right? Because they had to tell her before, so she had time to regroup. They wouldn't just surprise. You think? No?
I don't know. I feel like.
Do you see what Whoopi Goldberg said?
What'd she say?
Whoopi Goldberg said that Biden could arrest all the Republicans and put them in jail. You just need to see how unhinged this kind of thinking is. Well, you know what Joe Biden could do? Joe Biden, you have to see it because it's so
on TV.
crazy.
She said it's
on television.
The moderators, overwhelmed, tried to move the show forward, but it was clear the outcome was already sealed. Sunny Hostin sat red-faced, her hands trembling as she flipped her notes over again and again, searching for words that simply weren't there. Joe Rogan leaned back calmly, his expression steady, knowing the moment was his. "People don't forget nights like this," he said, his tone almost prophetic. "They remember who stood for truth and who crumbled under it." The final seconds of the broadcast were brutal. The cameras caught Sunny staring down at the table, avoiding eye contact, while Rogan and Gutfeld exchanged confident nods, the clear victors of a battle that had electrified millions of viewers. When the credits rolled, the chatter online exploded instantly. Clips of Sonny's breakdown, Rogan's crushing lines, and Gutfeld's relentless sarcasm flooded social media. Memes, headlines, and hashtags painted the moment as one of the most humiliating defeats ever seen on live TV. And just like that, the showdown was over, but the scandal was only beginning. Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld hadn't just defeated Sunny Hostin. They had destroyed her on live television in front of the entire nation, leaving a legacy that would haunt her career for years to come.